So the next thing we're going to look at has to do with complex numbers. So a complex number is essentially when we take a real number and we add it or subtract it to an imaginary number. So this right here represents what the standard form is for a complex number. So the A part of this represents the real part of the complex number. So that would be the real number. And then the BI here represents the imaginary unit. So when we talk about the imaginary unit and its value, so the imaginary unit itself is the square root of -1. And then as we move through raising the powers each time, I squared, the value of I squared would be -1. And that'll be important to know when we start to talk about some different things with multiplication in the next lesson. So then I cubed would really just be I times I squared. So this would be the square root of negative square root of -1, which essentially simplifies to -I. That's what I cubed would be. And then I to the fourth is simply just multiplying I squared by itself. So we would say here I squared times I squared, which would be -1 times -1, which comes out to equal +1. And then what you'll notice as you go through the powers is that the pattern to how the answers occur sort of repeat themselves. So for instance, I to the fifth has the same answer as the square root of -1, which is I to the sixth, don't have that negative there. I to the sixth has the same answer as I squared, which would be -1. I to the seventh has the same answer as I cubed, which is -I. And I to the fourth has the same answer as I to the eighth, which would just be +1. And then the cycle repeats itself in patterns of 4. So from here, just talking some basic examples of simplifying. So one of the things that we look at is taking complex numbers and adding them. So if we're going to do this in standard form, I want to do the real numbers first. So this would be +4 plus -5, and that would equal -1. And then for the imaginary units, I would have +3i plus +2i, and that would be +5i. So you can see here, the answer that you get is also a complex number where it has the real part first, the imaginary part second, and that's how we write answers like that so that they're in standard form. We can also do subtraction. So with the bottom one here, we're going to do the real numbers first. So this would be -3i minus +3i. That would, or -3 minus +3, that would be -6. And then there's -I minus -2i. Just watch your arithmetic here with subtracting by a negative. That's really like adding a positive. So you would have something like that there at the end. So once again, this is the standard form for a complex number. You have the real part first, you have the imaginary part second there. So some of the other things that we can do with square roots and the imaginary unit is when you have a negative inside of a square root. So remember that all the rules that we talk about for square roots only apply when the number inside the square root, the radicand, is a positive number. So the first thing we would want to do with something like this is we want to remove the negatives from inside the square root. And in order to do that, we take the negative out of the square root and we put the imaginary unit in front of it. So the square root of -12 just becomes I root 12. And then the same thing in the second set of parentheses here. The square root of -18 simply just becomes I square root of +18. So we have that there. So when we talk about simplifying, we want to simplify the square roots first. So just kind of putting this off to the side, remember square root of 12 would be the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, which would simplify to 2 root 3. And then the square root of 18, that would simplify to the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. And the answer to that would be 3 root 3. So when I go to take these two square roots and put them back in the parentheses, this right here would be 3 plus, I'm going to take the square root of 12 and make it 2 root 3, but remember there's this I that's in front there, so this would be 2i root 3. And then in the second square root, I have 5 minus square root of 18 is 3 root 3. Once again, don't forget the imaginary unit that goes with that, so this would be 3i root 3. Now I can take the two complex numbers and combine them. So I'm going to start with the reals. So this would be 3 plus 5. So that would be 8. And then for the imaginaries, I have +2i root 3 plus -3i root 3. and that would be negative I root 3 at the end. So once again, it's a complex number because it has the real part first, the imaginary part second. That's what puts that in standard form there. So at this point, you're going to want to pause the video and see what you could do with these checkpoint questions on your own, and then you can unpause and check your answers when you're done. So the answer for the first checkpoint question here, I'm going to put the reals together first. So this would be -6 minus -7. So when I combine those together, that would be +1. And then when I combine the imaginary units, I have 5i minus -10i. Once again, just watch your arithmetic there. This would be plus 15i when I combine those. So once again, that's in standard form because we have the real part first, the imaginary part second there. And then for the second one, just notice there's no number in front of the parentheses, so I got to put a 1 there, and I'm going to distribute that -1 to the parentheses, which would make this 4 plus 8i. And then the -4i, I'm just going to bring that down, and I'm going to combine the like terms here. So once again, reals first. So I got +4, and then the imaginary part, I have +8i, -4i. That would be plus 4i. So same thing here. That's standard form because you have real first, imaginary part second.